Hey, hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week, our new release slate includes the remake of Stephen King's classic novel Carrie, and two 80s and 90s action superstars team up in Escape Plan. Our new classic this week is Martha Marcy May Marlene, starring Elizabeth Olsen. Our old classic is The Last of the Mohicans, chosen by Joe. Woo. And our Oscar nominee A to Z film is the World War II bogey movie Action in the North Atlantic. Also, our top 5 this week is our favorite films starring one of the Escape Plan stars, Sylvester Stallone. Before all that, though, I wanted to ask you guys about this. Last week, at a 20th anniversary celebration of the show at the Paley Center in New York, X-Files stars David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson said that they, as well as show creator Chris Carter, are interested in making a third X-Files film. Now, the second one bombed commercially and wasn't super well received by critics, not speaking specifically about the X-Files or even TV show adaptations, but about film franchises in general. I want to know from you guys, is a less than stellar film featuring characters that you love a good thing, or would you rather let things die a dignified death, and if the final product isn't going to live up to your expectations, would you rather they not make it? Now, Joe, you are an X-Files fan, so you could actually speak specifically to that if you want, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, specifically with the X-Files and really just franchises in general, I really think that if they're not going to purport the best effort possible with the product, then I would rather just leave things on a high note and not drag things out as long as possible just to make a quick buck, because that's going to be bad for the fans, and admittedly over time, even the fans are going to stop coming out in droves to see these things and giving these people money. So really, I think that ultimately, if they decide to put a lot of effort into it and add other parts of the franchise as things go on, more sequels and spin-offs, I'd be fine with that. But admittedly, the last movie was kind of less than stellar. I really think you should leave things on a high note and then just look back on all the good stuff in the past.
Has there ever been a sequel of a film that you really liked, that you were so disappointed with, that you just were like, I wish they hadn't made that?
I don't know. I'm usually pretty open to sequels, but I guess I wouldn't say that I follow too many franchises like really adamantly that I would hate. I guess the closest thing I could say that some people might be familiar with is the original Spider-Man films by Sam Raimi, that trilogy. Spider-Man 1 and 2 were pretty good, but I think Spider-Man 3 was really messy, and I wouldn't say that I wouldn't wish that it was never made, but I could have lived without it. So, once again, if you're not going to put forth the best effort possible, then yeah, just kind of cut it off and let somebody take new reins on it.
So you would still like to see another maybe version of something,
maybe another version,
but a different take on it with maybe different actors,
maybe
different director,
different studio, different director. Like if it gets to a point where you got to say, hey, let's start fresh, take a new spin on it. Sometimes you need to do that. You can't keep using the same people over and over again, because they're going to run out of ideas and they're going to run out of energy. It's just going to happen.
Justin, what do you think about this?
I think when it comes to this, it's a matter of when most sequels are made, it's generally by the studios trying to tell a similar kind of storyline to make a quick buck. With this situation, it's the actors and I believe the show creator openly trying to say, we want to get this right. And you have to take that into consideration. This is not a let's make a quick buck just because we can. This is a let's try and do something for the fans because they think they deserve it.
Justin, I actually am wholeheartedly agreeing with you on that. If there are three people that you can respect from the X-Files, it's these three people, because they really are the core of it: the director, main writer, and the two actors. So I do agree with what you're saying, but they also said that about the previous film they did, which was really mediocre.
I was going to make that same point. Because I think that's what happened with The Hangover. Because the first one everybody loved, but the second one was so terrible that nobody saw the third one.
That's how I felt about it.
Largely.
I think it's sort of an inevitability that sometimes you're going to get really bad sequels with the best intents. Once again, I cut you off, and I apologize for that, Joe. Go ahead.
No, it's just that he makes me think of a really good point to add to this conversation. Sometimes there are really bad sequels that come out there, and they continue to come out there. Case in point, the Transformers films.
With a fourth one coming out next summer.
So there you go. That's another angle that maybe we aren't even considering, is that sometimes these are critically considered to be bad sequels, but people go see them.
But they make a ton of money.
They make a ton of money. So, I wish those hadn't come into existence.
Right.
So, I don't know.
It's sheer commercialism, and that's why I really think that the third X-Files movie may not be the worst idea out there. I mean, I don't think anyone's been overly satisfied with the first two outings, and it still has a huge fan base from the series, so why not give the third one a whirl if they think they can pull it off?
I'm a little bit torn on the issue myself. X-Files aside, you look at my favorite show of all time, which is The Simpsons. Simpsons movie, fantastic. We don't need to talk about that. But the TV show itself is sort of along these same themes. I mean, I think everybody can admit that about 10 years ago, it went from the best show on TV, grade A, to somewhere in the B- range, some episodes even worse than that. But I am very happy that it still continues to exist as an entity. Are they ever going to be as good as the first, say, 10 seasons? Of course not. I can't imagine a show in its 25th year that would be. But movies, I feel like, are a little bit different on that end because you only get one every, let's say, 2 to 3 years.
It's true.
And so you hope that the quality would be a lot better than you're getting. And I think a prime example that Justin and I sort of poke fun at a lot is the Police Academy series. Because the first movie is a comedy classic, still holds up. Second one was all right. Third one was pretty good. Fourth and after are just the worst. And I do wish that they weren't made, and a lot of the principal characters from the first couple movies weren't even in them. And I think it is sort of an example of, well, here's a cash grab of these things keep making money, so much so that at one point they had an animated series on the air and a syndicated half-hour sitcom, but they're terrible movies. But they include characters that are beloved. So I'm a little torn on the issue as a whole.
Well, I guess if it's a franchise that I really care about, like, say, for instance, the X-Files or the Marvel movies, of course, because I like it, I'm going to want to see more if more good quality stuff is possible, if it can be released. But if they're just going to drag it through the mud, of course I don't want to see that. But if the characters, are going to be in there that I like, and it's the primary writers and creators behind it that say they legitimately want to come back and at least cap it off, then definitely let's keep building the franchise. I mean, why not?
All right. Well, let's kick off our new releases. We only have 3 this week, and Justin's going to talk about the first one, and that is Carrie.
So, Chloe Moretz plays Carrie White, a shy young girl constantly being bullied by her peers and repeatedly being hounded by her religious mother, played by Julianne Moore. After an incident in the locker room cost her tormentors their prom privileges, their leader, Chris, played by Portia Doubleday, vows revenge, unaware of the dark power that Carrie is learning to harness and control. Now, I have to say that there's a little bit of nostalgia for this adaptation for me. Carrie was the first Stephen King novel I ever read, so it holds a little bit of sentimental value to me. However, when it comes to Stephen King adaptations, it really needs to be about the characters well before there's any real sense of terror or horror within the actual storyline. Carrie pretty much completely ignores that concept, and it's really a shame given that the director, Kimberly Pierce, who most know from Boys Don't Cry, could have really done something with this. While I'm not entirely sure a new Carrie was necessary at this point in time, the overall theme of bullying and its ever-present impact is really a timeless subject. However, despite attempting to update the story, the dialogue still feels very dated, with the storyline not really feeling like it's a realistic interpretation of high school life. Quite possibly the best thing Carrie really does have going for it comes from Moretz, who really captures the innocence and vulnerability of Carrie. It doesn't save the movie, but it does really make a world of difference in the overall grade for this film. Carrie gets a C-.
I saw the original movie 2 days after watching the brand new version, just as a comparison. All the same, my grade will reflect my thoughts on the new movie as is before I saw the original. I did just want to sort of see how it compares, because the one thing I kept hearing was, why bother making this? The original's still a classic, it's still great. So let me talk about the new movie first. You can definitely see the fantastic storytelling of Stephen King, and there's some interesting characters, but for me, it was all just sort of there. There wasn't really a whole lot to write home about. I agree with you, Justin, that the dialogue was just sort of hokey, maybe even, and a little bit dated. I thought Judy Greer was very likable as one of the film's few characters on Carrie's side. She plays the gym coach. I did feel bad for Carrie. Her mother and her classmates are messing her up 6 ways from Sunday. And I think Moretz does a pretty decent job. I don't think she's quite on point here as in the Kick-Ass movies, but I do think she was definitely one of the bright spots in the film. Also, I thought the makeup people did a really great job with this. They made Julianne Moore, who is really a beautiful woman, look just as crazy as possible. And they made Moretz look very, very pale and not quite frumpy, but not the way she looks. One of my big issues with the movie is that it's not that it didn't necessarily need to be made, because, I mean, the original is close to 40 years old. There's definitely a few things after I saw that did need tweaking or updating to bring it to the present. And some of what happened in the new version did improve on the original. Some of it failed. As a comparison, I think Julianne Moore is basically just sort of doing a Sissy Spacek impression, and it doesn't turn out that well to me. And I really like Julianne Moore. We talked about her in my Don John review a few weeks ago, and I thought she was one of the few bright spots in that movie for me. Here, I think she's just sort of trying to out-crazy Sissy Spacek's version, I guess. And I just thought the movie wasn't that scary. The end was pretty cool, you know. I'm sure everybody probably generally knows what happens, but I didn't think, even before I saw the old one, I didn't think it was anything to write home about. And I leave Carrie with a C+. Joe?
Well, I think I have to agree with you that Moretz is easily the best thing about the movie, and she really gives a great performance. I think that she did a fantastic job with the role, capturing both the innocence and also the intensity that this young girl goes through. And I thought that one thing the movie did fairly well, despite some of the hokier moments that I guess they were trying to keep from the original, I really did feel for the girl, and I felt like there really was kind of a claustrophobic atmosphere, and I really felt that. I really kind of felt very disturbed by a lot of things in the movie. I thought Julianne Moore, admittedly, I guess she was doing kind of a Spacek impression, but I don't know. Overall, I think that what made this movie a little bit edgier than the previous film was just some of the directorial choices, like some of the close-ups on the self-torture was really gritty to me.
Ooh, yeah.
I think that kind of pushed over the edge, and maybe it was a bit gratuitous, a bit unnecessary, but it really worked. Something worked for this film for me. It just made me feel very uncomfortable. It was very unsettling, but that was kind of balanced between some of these really hokey moments. Like, I thought some of the exaggerated action scenes, like there was a scene with knives and telekinetic stabbing of a certain individual, which was kind of, I think, a little over the top, but that was just kind of this uneven feeling throughout the whole film. It was kind of this weird balance, but I did like the fact that I thought that they managed to make certain characters from the previous film more sympathetic. Like, there's this one girl who decides to kind of help Carrie out, and I thought they did a better job of exploring that than they did in the original film.
I agree with that.
And I also did notice that they did expand a bit on certain things from the original film that were in the novel that I guess due to special effects they couldn't do in the original film, like what she does to the car and her brief tirade through the town later on. I thought that was kind of cool to get to see that on film. I thought that was pretty well executed. Special effects were great. The music was great. I really enjoyed it overall. I'm going to give this version of Carrie a B-.
Did you think it was scary, though?
No, but I didn't expect it to be.
Okay.
I never really thought of Carrie as being a scary film. Though I will admit De Palma's version does have a creepier atmosphere.
It does.
I can't say that I was ever really frightened by the film. Though there is one big difference between the two. In the De Palma version, I think they really focused on the atmosphere and kind of Carrie exploring the telekinetic powers that she has a little better. I thought there was a slower development. In this version, I actually thought it was focused more on the characters, which I liked more. And that's one thing I think personally was a bit of an improvement. And that's one of the things about King's writing that I guess is difficult to transfer onto film, is that his characters are very memorable, but they're borderline realistic. So I think some of that hokiness, trying to get past it, might be difficult. So I don't know if that's a real huge criticism against the film.
Well, and one of my problems with this kind of a remake, you know, it's a remake of such an iconic film, is that I think they try to have as much of the original present in the new film, and I think that's where we do get a lot of these hokier lines from. Obviously, you gotta do They're All Gonna Laugh at You. That is the ultimate classic from the film. But in watching the original a couple days later, there were some bits of dialogue that were spoken word for word from the new one as well, that were they seem out of place in 2013.
I think they were just trying to do that.
I think that's sort of what Justin was leaning towards with that.
That makes sense. I guess it's one of those tricky elements where you're trying to basically keep the original fan base happy, the people that loved the film and the book, and also try to make it new for a newer audience and expand on it.
Right.
And I think they did a little bit of both, and I think that kind of brings the film up for some people and down for others. So it's tricky. It's kind of a mixed bag. But I liked what I saw. I thought it was fairly successful. I wasn't bored at all.
And what do you guys grade the original?
A, easily.
Really? See, I didn't think it was all that impressive. I would give the original a B.
B+.
Yeah, I didn't think it was all that much better. I mean, I can see for the time, I guess it was certainly one of the earlier huge horror movies at the multiplex. Well, back then, I guess, Cineplex.
It's kind of interesting because I really like films based on atmosphere, and Carrie does have a really great atmosphere. That's one of the best things about the movie. But I guess that's pretty much really the best that has going for me personally.
Justin, what makes the original an A for you?
Well, I guess it's time that we should finally explain what factors into my what I choose to grade things. I take about 50% into narrative. I try to use about 40% for stylistic elements, and I try to throw in about 10% for personal enjoyment. When it comes to Carrie, the hard thing to understand about it is it was Stephen King's first novel, and it was very, very raw. I would argue it is incredibly difficult to adapt for the screen just because it's really only a 180-page book with the last 20 pages or so being essentially reports and interviews. The result of that is obviously more than a little challenging, and I think De Palma did a fantastic job telling a story that is very brief but very unique. And he did that in a way that lends his, as we talked about in the Untouchables review, very stylistic in terms of looking like Hitchcock, particularly in his opening sequences and in the chilling way he shoots the prom scene. But I thought the performances were really good. I thought the way he brings his characters to life is really good. The ending still scares the crap out of me. And I think for just being a story that I don't really consider that frightening, it's probably one of my favorite horror movies.
Well, I do think that a Carrie reboot wasn't the worst idea. I mean, the original is almost 40 years old, like I said, and it does speak to a new generation with the bullying and stuff, which is obviously very present, in high school these days, which is a point Justin brought up. But let's move on here to our next movie, and that is Machete Kills, and Joe's going to tell us about that.
Well, this is the sequel to Machete, in which Machete, who is played by Danny Trejo, is a former bounty hunter turned secret agent who, after the death of his partner, sorry there's spoilers, but I don't really care because it's Jessica Alba, and after this he is hired by the president to take out a Mexican revolutionary who may be part of a much bigger plan to basically cause world destruction. Well, I think someone put it very correctly when they said that it's difficult to critique a movie that's supposed to be bad. So I guess going into that, taking that into account, it's an exploitation film. It's supposed to be over the top and ridiculous, which it is. So I guess in that regard, it's a success. There's a lot of really blatantly violent and sexual overtones to the movie. A lot of really obvious CGI blood. It's very bad. Is it so bad it's good, though? There were a few moments in the film where I did laugh, but overall I didn't think it was that funny. There are a lot of good cast members that make lots of little cameos. Some things I liked, some things I didn't. The biggest disappointment, I think, for me was that Danny Trejo is actually a decent character actor, and in this one he wasn't really trying that hard. However, there are a lot of funny science fiction elements that I kind of like they were throwing in there. A lot of Star Wars and Star Trek references that I couldn't help but laughing at. I thought it was kind of cool. Rodriguez was really having fun with this movie, which is kind of more what I wanted to see in this film that I didn't think we had in the previous one, which I thought tried to take itself a little too seriously. One of the best things about it was Mel Gibson, once again spoilers, is essentially a villain, but that's pretty easy to figure out. I thought that he was having a great time with this, and basically the first act of the movie is really, really messy. I didn't think it worked well at all. But after they got past the initial part of the plot, I thought that it was just really crazy, and I kind of enjoyed it. Overall, though, it wasn't really the best outing, and I would give Machete Kills a C-.
Yeah, with a movie like this, you really do have to ask yourself, is it so bad that it's good, or is it just bad? For me, this was a really terrible, unfunny, and stupid movie. I wasn't amused by the stunt casting, Lady Gaga, Sofia Vergara, Cuba Gooding Jr. None of them really impressed me. Mel Gibson did do an alright job, I'll give you that, but most of the talent here was completely wasted. The phony trailer thing in these grindhouse-type movies is getting really old. For me, nothing about this movie worked. However, I do like the Machete character. He's the only person that's even remotely interesting. I do think he was pretty much sleepwalking through this movie, and I like Danny Trejo.
Which surprises me.
But he was not at his best here, let's say.
Phoning it in, they say.
He was phoning it in. However, he has a few chuckle-worthy lines. I didn't particularly chuckle, but I did smile a little bit. I liked it when he kept saying that Machete doesn't do certain things. Machete don't tweet. Machete, I thought that was funny.
My favorite line of the film, Machete doesn't fail.
Machete doesn't fail. I like the character, and I sort of have the same type of principle, I guess, with the Medea movies, because they're horrible. But I like the Medea character, and I think that she is funny sometimes. So every movie has a few little, gems that keeps you from getting an F. And for me, it's sort of the same thing with Machete Kills. So I leave it with a D.
Wow, I'm surprised.
Justin?
When it comes to Machete, I'll be frank. I think this is a franchise that has well overstayed its welcome. The first one I thought was okay. This one is significantly worse. I thought for about the first 20 minutes or so, it was at least kind of had a campy fun tone to it, and then it just got increasingly dumb and infuriating. You could argue that it was intentionally supposed to be bad, but there's a very big difference between bad and not even trying, and this was the latter. It really did not even have remotely good bad acting, even by grindhouse standards. The leads are pretty much wasted. Most of the characters that you're looking forward to seeing are on screen for maybe 10 minutes, if that. And to be honest, it felt like a feature-length promo for a potential third movie, and that just annoyed me beyond belief. And because of that, Machete Kills gets a D.
Well, I'm curious, why didn't you fail it? That sounded like a failure.
Yeah, it didn't sound like there was one good thing about it.
Yeah, you gotta give me something positive.
Like I said, the first 20 minutes I thought were at least fun by campy standards. I won't say they were good. I'll say they were essentially like Grindhouse. Mm-hmm. It was just goofiness. It wasn't as entertaining as Death Proof or Planet Terror, but it was at least kind of like trashy fun. Mm-hmm. I thought the fake trailer for a third movie was kind of entertaining. I wish the entire movie hadn't been based upon that with absolutely zero resolution. But
well, let me ask you something, because this is kind of in relation to the question that Dan posed earlier. Now, these are two films which have honestly done fairly badly, but the whole film was basically lead up to a third film, which I believe you mentioned you would be kind of interested in if they made it. How do you really feel about that statement?
I still stand on my original point that I made earlier in the podcast. Mm-hmm. I don't have a problem with a sequel if the people are trying to do a better job with it. Mm-hmm. I'm okay when people address their flaws. I'm not okay with the idea of let's make a sequel just to make a buck. That seems wrong to me, and that's not what film is.
Mm-hmm. I guess Joe's point is these movies aren't even making a buck.
But they're still making them.
I mean, I guess with DVD sales and stuff they do.
That's true.
But they don't do well at the box office at all.
Well, from what I understand, they do make a decent amount of the money back through DVD sales. Mm-hmm. I guess what I'm asking is, if this whole movie was basically leading up to the third movie, which is it seems like Rodriguez really wants to do you think he should do it?
I'd roll with it if he thought he could pull it off. I mean, the Machete character is a lot of fun.
He is.
He really is.
He really is. And I think that can lend itself to a good movie. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that 2 times out. I'd still say give it a shot if the script is there and the actors are willing to come back, which I'm sure they are. I mean, It's not like these are going to cost a ton of money to make. At least I don't think so.
True.
All right, well, we're going to close out our new release list with Escape Plan, which will lead into our top 5 Sylvester Stallone films for the week. In Escape Plan, Sly plays Ray Breslin, a securities expert that literally wrote the book on breaking out of maximum security prisons. He takes a multi-million-dollar job with his business partner to test the security of a top-secret prison in a mystery location. And the plan, as he thought it, goes awry pretty soon, and he finds himself in the prison for real, not just to test its security, but that his partner has double-crossed him and wants Ray to stay there for the rest of his life. Soon after he realizes this, he meets Rotmeyer, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the two team up for an escape together. This movie is not great. It has its problems, but it is fun. It's leaps and bounds better than some of the two stars' recent projects, including Bullet to the Head and The Expendables 2. The reason this movie works is because it's got the exact right mix of storyline, action, mystery, and comedy. It doesn't hurt that both these characters are very likable. It was also nice for me that unlike in Expendables or Schwarzenegger's The Last Stand or even the recent Red movies, there aren't any tired jokes about the age of the actors here. It's just two masters of action films doing what they do best. Where it comes apart is in the odd quasi-romantic subplot with one of Ray's coworkers, and of course the peak of the action towards the end uses most of the cliches in the book, as you'd figure. But that being said, it is far more entertaining than either of our other new releases this week, and I give Escape Plan a B. Joe?
You know, I was not expecting this movie to be good. I wasn't expecting to like it.
Nor was I.
I really wasn't, because the last Stallone movie that came out I didn't really like, and I thought the last Schwarzenegger movie was okay. So I was really, really skeptical about this one, but I'm going to use the word. I believe this film was pretty solid. It's a pretty tight, fun action movie. And I think the best thing about it was Stallone and Schwarzenegger, their characters, as you said, are both likable, and they have really good chemistry, and they're having fun. I think Jim Caviezel played a pretty creepy bad guy. I think he did a good performance. It's good to see him whenever he pops up. Really, I thought that some of the whole aspects of escaping a prison, I like a good prison escape movie, how they kind of went into details about that. It seemed really interesting. It had me really interested from the film, from the first act. Yeah, admittedly, there were some subplots with some of the side characters that were very predictable or just underdeveloped, but we didn't care about them anyway. So they kind of just shoved them to the side by the second act. And really, it's just a fun ride. It's really enjoyable. I'll definitely watch it again at some point. There's really not much for me to say. I would say that I'm going to give this movie a B+.
Justin?
All right. Well, I cannot say I'm as generous as you two are, but I'm glad you both enjoyed it. I thought this was a very predictable, generic but entertaining escapist action movie. No pun intended. Anyways,
go ahead.
I thought this was very generic. It kind of felt like a direct-to-DVD movie that got lucky. To be honest, I still was relatively entertained. The leads, you two say they're likable. I thought they were okay. They moved the story forward, and I guess maybe they kept my attention. They had a few funny bits. I thought most of them were forced and kind of like, let's parody our own careers. To me, it was just sort of tedious. And to be honest, I was with it up until about the start of the third act, where it just ran on entirely too long. Cliches were all over the place, and it was just a complete slog from there. Escape Plan is worth a DVD rental for maybe a little bit of cheap entertainment, but it's just not the action film it wants to be or thinks it is. Escape Plan gets a C.
I gotta say, I mean, I didn't think it was too long at all.
No.
It was the only movie of the three that I wasn't looking at my cell phone to see the time every 15 to 20 minutes. I don't think I even looked at my cell phone once the whole movie. I really thought it was timed very well, paced very well, and I'm surprised that you didn't think that Sylvester Stallone's character was likable.
His character was quite likable. I thought he was a very, I mean, there's nothing really wrong with him.
It's not that he's not necessarily unlikable, but they take way too long to give him any form of character development, and when they do, it just is a little too late in the game to feel anything for him. It's like right before an action sequence, by the way, here's this.
Well,
it's just awkward and out of place.
I don't know if it's really necessarily the writing for his background that really carries it. I think it's just his performance and the way he acts throughout the film.
I honestly couldn't have cared less for his overall mentality of the film. It's like, okay, you're an average guy that likes to escape from prisons. That's kind of unrealistic, but sure, run with it. It's an action movie.
I could see securities companies doing stuff like that.
It's believable, consulting firms.
Yeah.
Possibly, but I don't know. It was odd to me. I don't quite understand where you guys found the likable nature to his character.
It might have just been the performances, honestly, and just the chemistry they have with each other.
Well, listen, I gotta say this. I like Sylvester Stallone as a person in movies, and I don't know if that stems from Rocky, but I really like seeing him on screen. In Bullet to the Head, I didn't give it a D because he was unlikable in it. He was fine in it. It was just the script was awful. So many problems with Bullet to the Head I don't need to go into.
I think Dan's going for actor's charisma.
Certainly the character wasn't unlikable.
No.
And if I already like Sylvester Stallone, if there's nothing unlikable about the character, I find the character likable.
I think I see where he's going with this. When you take a movie like this, it's an action movie. Sylvester Stallone primarily does one type of movie. He plays basically one kind of character. So you don't really need a whole lot of specifics for his background. He's got to just kind of roll with whatever situation the film puts him in. And that's kind of what allows him to be, I guess, a somewhat both flexible and inflexible actor.
Which is fine, but it doesn't necessarily bring anything to the table. And to me, it's just sort of an average performance from him. It's not as bad as, say, his cardboard cutout character of Barney Ross in The Expendables, but...
Those movies are bad.
Yeah, there's an example. There's a big difference in the step between those two.
There is, but it's still a very average performance to me.
Did you not think, like Joe and I, that the methods of escaping from these prisons
were cool.
was at least interesting?
They actually put some time and effort into those. They really did. That wasn't something slapped together.
I was getting to that.
Okay.
That was actually really, really interesting, albeit I thought the weird let's cut to blueprint POV was peculiar, let's say. It seemed a little cheesy. I got what they were trying to do. Mm-hmm. I'm just not entirely sure if it came out the way they wanted it to.
I guess here's my thing. This is obviously a check your brain at the door movie.
It is.
You don't go into Escape Plan with Oscar hopes, or it's not going to enrich your mind at all.
Not in the slightest.
Not in the slightest.
As I always say, Dan, you have to judge a movie for what it's trying to be.
Well, and I guess that's... Justin and I have talked about this for, a while, on and off, about how I think he's a little too hard on action movies. Because I think no action movie probably deserves an A or an A+. No action movie like this. Maybe your Untouchables is... Maybe your Die Hards. Mm-hmm. But, in the last 20 years, has an action movie really, really deserved an A? I don't think so. But you have to take it for what it is. In the action genre, I think this movie really hit the mark.
It succeeded.
Yeah, especially when compared to all of the titles I mentioned, including the 2 Dredd films. I really think that this was one of the better action movies of the last year or two.
You actually bring up a good point. I like this movie better than both the Dredd films. Mm-hmm. Surprisingly.
And you didn't dislike those movies that much.
I enjoyed those movies, which is why I was surprised that I would like this one, which seemed more generic more. I think that's just because of the chemistry the 2 actors had.
I guess my point is action, on the whole, is a check-your-brain-at-the-door genre.
Mm-hmm. But it doesn't necessarily have to be.
No.
But I would say 98% of the time it is.
And I agree with you. I'm just saying that, to me, this was a very generic, by the numbers. We have 2... action vets in here doing their thing. We've seen it a million times. It's going to be 1,000,001 now. Let's just throw it out there and hope somebody's going to see it for nostalgia.
I think, Justin, what you're trying to say is that this movie was a direct-to-DVD movie that probably wouldn't even be worth noting if Stallone and Schwarzenegger weren't in it.
That's a fairly good assessment, yes.
I don't know. I think you mentioned that it was parodying their careers. I never really got that feeling. I thought they were taking it fairly seriously for what it was.
Well, that's specifically why I mentioned that they didn't cross over those, with
We're
those
so
jokes, like latest Die Hard movie did as well. Mm-hmm. And that sort of geriatric comedy, I don't think was welcome here, and I'm glad that they didn't use it. Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's move on to some Sylvester Stallone films that we all enjoyed with our top 5. And, Joe, I don't know about you. Justin and I talked about this earlier, but we sort of limited our Rocky intake on the top 5.
I heard.
Just to sort of level the playing field a bit. Joe, why don't we start with you and hear your numbers 5 through 2.
All right, no problem. Number 5 is Daylight. Basically, Sylvester Stallone has to rescue a bunch of people that get stuck in a tunnel that's become flooded. I saw it a few times. I thought it was a very dumb movie, but it was very enjoyable. Stallone actually gives a pretty fun performance. That's really all I have to say about that one. My 4th movie is Judge Dredd. This is a movie that I will admit is pretty bad. However, it is so bad that it is very, very good. And in all honesty, there's a lot of great set designs. I love the character. There's just so many memorable scenes. I mean, Armand Asante, you can't get a more over-the-top bad guy than that. Really, Stallone hams it up for this, but it is so wonderful. It's so memorable. I've always loved that since childhood. It's one of the few reasons that I was excited for the new Dredd movie, so it always have a special place in my heart. My number 3, appropriately enough, is Rocky 3. And I'm not entirely sure why. It's one of my favorite Rocky movies, and I guess it's mostly because there's just that point where it stopped being kind of serious and just started being really, really corny. And it has Mr. T as a really ridiculous, over-the-top villain, which I like, in traditional 80s fashion. And of course, after seeing that movie, I couldn't get Eye of the Tiger out of my head after like days. And I kind of like the fact that the Rocky character had kind of started to get a little bit arrogant, and he had to get taken back down to his roots again. So that was one thing about the character I actually liked in that movie. And my number 2 is the original Rocky movie. Nothing to really be said about it. It's one of the best Stallone performances. It's a great story. He put a lot of heart into it, and actually showed that despite what some people think about the man, he actually has real talent as an actor and as a writer.
Well said. Yeah, my number 5 is Escape Plan. I was sort of between this one and Demolition Man, but I haven't seen Demolition Man in about 20 years, and so I'm not exactly sure if it holds up as well as I remember. So I sort of went with the new and left Escape Plan at number 5. Number 4 is Rocky Balboa. Now, this is the first Rocky movie I actually saw. I saw it when it was first released on DVD a few years ago, and it wasn't till either last year or the year before that I watched all of the other Rocky films. And I thought that just out of the gate, this was a great, great movie. I mean, I knew, the lore of Rocky, and I had grown up with Rocky on in the house sometimes. My brothers would be watching it. But this was the first movie I actually sat down and watched with Rocky in it. And I just thought that the whole storyline was really good. I thought it was a little bit unbelievable, but, what good hero story isn't, I suppose. So that is my number 4. Number 3 is Copland. Now, this was Sylvester Stallone's bid for some sort of real acting credibility outside of the action genre. It was from 1997 and really boasts a pretty good cast. Ray Liotta is in it. Janine Garofalo is in it, playing a pretty serious part, actually. And it's all about basically corrupt cops, and, there's some mob ties, and he plays one of the policemen. And it was just a really, really great movie, I thought. I thought the story was good for it. Ray Liotta is pretty much good in everything. You can usually depend on that. Yeah. So Copland is my number 3, and my number 2 is Rocky 2. I do enjoy Rocky 3. It's certainly one of the more classic ones in the series, especially since it introduces Eye of the Tiger. But 2 really was just a great follow-up to 1. I think it's one of the few times that people do sort of openly debate which Rocky was better, the first or the second. The first obviously got nominated for Best Picture. I believe it won Best Picture. But Rocky 2 is also a really, really great effort, and it really continues the storyline very well. So that is my number 2. Justin?
One note before I begin. These are movies that are selected on if they are actually good, not necessarily if Stallone gave a good performance in them. Number 5 is Cliffhanger. Out of all of Stallone's movies, this is the one that probably has some of the best cinematography in it. I love the mountain shots. I love the scenes of them climbing. There are actually some real good elements of suspense for this. However, the reason this is at my number 5 is the really good potential storyline that gives the film a strong emphasis in like the first 15, 20 minutes. Kind of starts getting more generic as it goes along, which was disappointing for me. Number 4, which I'm sure Joe's going to love here, is First Blood. I thought this pointed a very well-needed look into how we were taking care of soldiers when they return home, particularly after something as horrible as Vietnam. I thought the interplay between Stallone playing Rambo and Colonel Troutman is arguably the best in the entire movie, particularly near the finale where he's essentially lamenting his entire career coming back. And when they were re-releasing it in theaters for like a day a couple years back, they released it with the original ending that they proposed for it. And I think if they had done that, it would have been perfect. Is it still a good movie? Yeah, but it's not without its flaws. Number 3, much like Dan, is Copland. I thought Stallone did a very good job playing a flawed character. Much like Rambo, it's very, very frustrating, but they do a very good job of showing him playing a character that should be in control and isn't in control. And the ensemble really brings this tale together in a way that invokes both suspense, action, and a fair bit of mystery in terms of how everything's going to come together. However, I thought while the story's developing, it did become forced in some spots. And that's why I couldn't take it much higher than a number 3. And my number 2 is Rocky. It really is living proof that Stallone, despite all other assumptions, he can both write and act. He offers up a bunch of human characters that are, for the most part, relatively likable, with his character playing Rocky, a man truly at the bottom of the barrel, as the central focus. However, Rocky, at the start of it, it's interesting that you say Rocky 3, he's kind of arrogant. In Rocky 1, he's excruciatingly arrogant, which offers a dimension of realism, but still, it's hard to get into, which is why I left it at my number 2.
From what I remember in the film, he had some arrogant moments, but he really was kind of a down-to-earth guy just struggling to make it, and he really stuck his neck out for people in his neighborhood. I wouldn't really classify him as arrogant the way I perceived him. I don't know, Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, I sort of perked up a little bit when that was said, to be honest. But, everybody's interpretation is a little different.
I'm sure he had some moments, but I thought he was pretty likable.
I would say maybe more smug.
Smug might be the word.
Than arrogant.
He was
I'll agree with that.
If you'll give me that.
No, I'll allow that. That's a fair word.
There was a big difference between him from Rocky 1 to 2 to 3. He was arrogant by Rocky 3.
Yeah.
I for the most part, I completely agree.
And by 5, he was pretty much brain dead.
And then 6, he miraculously recovered.
Spoiler alert.
It's fine, they don't have
all right, let's do our number 1s. Joe, what's your favorite Sly movie?
My favorite Sylvester Stallone movie is one that Justin mentioned, and that is First Blood. I believe it is honestly one of the best action movies of the 80s. It is dark, it is gritty, and I think it's taking a serious look at veterans coming back from Vietnam and the struggles they had to endure. And I will admit that there are some elements to this character that could be perceived as unlikable. However, some of the things that were done to him to the film by the people that did to him, they were somewhat unlikable themselves. But I think that makes the character more complex and more tragic. And as you mentioned before, his confession towards the end of the film is honestly one of the best performances I've ever seen Sylvester Stallone give. It was incredibly well written, and I'll be honest, it made me pretty darn sad for him by the end of the film. Because after seeing all the destruction this man could wreak, he was kind of a scared man inside that was suffering and was just trying to reach out. And the world wouldn't accept him. That's how I perceived it.
My number 1 is the original Rocky. This is a movie that when I was a kid, like I said, my brothers would watch it. I thought of it as a boxing movie, a sports movie. I don't want to see that. I'm not interested. And it wasn't until Rocky Balboa that I saw that I realized, okay, this actually is a character movie. Boxing is so sort of on the side of what is really at the heart of these films. And when I saw the original Rocky, like I said, just a couple of years ago, I was blown away. It is so much more than sports, boxing, any of that. It really is one of the most human stories that has come out. And it did win Best Picture back in 1977 for the 76 films. And I mean, I didn't see any of the other films that year probably, but I would say it's probably not going to get much better than Rocky.
My number 1 is Rocky 2. I thought this was...
And the debate continues, like I said.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's great.
I thought this was a sequel that really expanded upon the universe and the characters within it. Each person is offered so much more to the overall narrative. But what I really did love about this movie was there was such a great look into both sides of the general conflict leading into the climactic battle between Rocky and Apollo Creed. In the first film, we kind of think Creed is this sort of cocky star that just wants to knock some lumps into a newcomer. In this one, it's more or less I just want to prove myself and show everyone that this is not some sort of a fix. And I thought that added a great layer of humanity, especially when people are accusing him at the very start of the film of everything that happened in the first film being a fix. And that's why I had to make it my number 1.
Yeah, Rocky is really one of those series that you can ask 100 different people what their favorite Rocky movie is, and other than probably Rocky 5.
No one will ever say Rocky 5.
Nobody's ever saying that. But you will get all of those movies, and it's one of the rare franchises that you really will find that.
There is a great amount of diversity. You'll hear like 1, 2, 3, 4, 6.
I know a lot of people whose favorite movie is 4.
I've heard 4 more than anything, and I can understand why, because it's so over the top.
Yeah.
And it's so memorable because of that.
As a movie, I don't think it's as good as 1, 2, or 3.
I think it's
Balboa.
Of the movies, it's definitely one of the weakest, but it has some very memorable.
It's one of the most fun.
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah,
that might be why people like it so much. It has
because it's so wildly goofy.
It's got a robot in it, for Christ's sake. But it's kind of interesting you bring up Rocky 1 and 2, because I've always seen them kind of like Superman 1 and 2, where they're just basically one movie.
It's true. I mean, if movies were legitimately allowed to be 4.5 hours. I could easily see Rocky and Rocky 2 just being the same movie, like a Kill Bill.
It's a boxing drama epic.
Exactly.
And by the way, Justin, one last thing. You drew First Blood.
And Justin's also going to start us off on our triple feature. This week, we had our new classic of Martha Marcy May Marlene. Justin?
All right. Martha Marcy May Marlene is about a young girl. I won't say her name because it changes 3 times throughout the movie, hence the title. Played by Elizabeth Olsen, is a member of a cult who one day decides to flee and live with their sister. However, despite her escape, whether or not the cult may still be after her remains hauntingly in question. This is a very frustrating movie to review because as a whole, it's very ambiguous in terms of narrative construction. In order to give the same feeling of paranoia as the protagonist, the story decides to present both sides of the argument via flashbacks, intertwined with the actual present. At some points, these transitions are unique and interesting. At others, it takes several minutes to even realize it's a flashback.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
What really keeps this interesting, other than its originality and cinematography, is the performances, largely from Olsen herself, who really gives a unique and enticing performance. While her appearance seems innocent, she offers a world of depth to her character that shows just how out of place she is after years within this cult. It's not a movie everyone is going to enjoy, but it is a movie that has some unique performances and a chilling concept. Martha Marcy May Marlene gets a B from me.
Joe, you had not seen this movie previously.
That is correct. I'm just wondering, where has this Olsen girl been? Because
she's the hidden Olsen sister.
Because, this girl actually has some real talent. And
a lot of it.
I've never heard her before, but it was awesome to see her. She does an excellent job with the movie. I think that she was probably the best thing about the movie. She just really sold that really interesting concept this film was trying to explore about the cults and people being taken in and brainwashed, and it's not something that is explored very often in film, so it was interesting to see it done. It has a really unique atmosphere and tone to it. It's very dark, moody, and I do like some of the intercuts. Some of them were interesting. There is a lot of really cool cinematography and kind of really chilling line readings. The dialogue was very good. Overall, though, I think this film was a bit choppy at points, and because the narrative is a bit confusing, I think it might require multiple viewings. I think you said, Justin, it's not for everybody. It's a very dark film, and it is trying new things, which I do like. But on the whole, I thought it was very interesting, and it did captivate me for the most part. And I think that the ending really leaves a lot to be interpreted and could lead for a lot of good discussion. So I think it's definitely one that could be explored once again and revisited. Overall, I would give this film, which I'm going to call the 4 M's because I can't remember the title, a B-.
Yeah, I think the acting really is where the movie shines. Elizabeth Olsen is fantastic. Unfortunately, all of her subsequent movies are not quite as good. Silent House was one of the worst things that came out last year. I mean, she was all right in it, but she's really, really quite good in this. And also, John Hawkes is really, really creepy in this movie. He does a great job portraying the cult leader. Justin and I enjoyed him earlier this year in a movie called The Sessions. I think he is a very, very good actor, and hopefully, we'll see some more from him as well. I think even the supporting cast is good here. But where the movie falls apart is, for me, Sean Durkin's directing. He's a first-time director, still maybe finding his footing a little bit, but the flashbacks and the transitions to the present, Justin is absolutely right. They're just confusing, and at least until maybe halfway through the film where really you get used to them, you're left wondering what's going on. Is this a flashback? Are we in the present day? And by the time you realize, you've missed like a minute and a half of dialogue because you're trying to figure out what's going on. And that really tears the movie down a bit for me. I'm going to leave Martha... You know what? I'm calling it the 4 M's as well, Joe. I give it a B as well. All right, our old classic is from Joe this week. He picked one out for us called Last of the Mohicans. And tell us about that. Why'd you pick that one?
All right. Last of the Mohicans is a film starring Daniel Day-Lewis as Nathaniel, the adopted son of the last member of the Mohican tribe. This movie takes place during the French and Indian War and the middle of a massive conflict between the British, the French, and various Native American tribes, and follows Nathaniel and his family as they try to escort several British individuals through this war-torn area. And, well, I guess the main reason I picked the film was because I really have a fascination with just the historical aspect of the movie. And I think that in terms of the score, musically, and in terms of the visuals, I think this film does a really good job of captivating you in that particular respect and kind of setting up this time period. And I thought that the costume design and the battles were amazing. I thought the story was interesting. There was a lot of good historical points that were made. And I think that's the strongest aspect of the film, was it really takes you there. The only real negative of the film I could see was that some of the characters are underdeveloped. But I think that there are a lot of really, really excellently sold scenes of the film that are just so memorable that they really stuck out to me. And I guess because I've seen the film so many times, it's just kind of become a classic to me. And I would give it a solid B.
Well, I had not seen this movie previously. I thought Daniel Day-Lewis was great. I think we discovered as we were watching it that this was only, the second Daniel Day-Lewis movie I've ever seen after Lincoln.
Which I thought you'd seen more of his stuff.
I thought I would have, but I guess not.
This is one of his first outings, too.
Yes, it was, and two very critical acclaim back in the day. I thought he was great in it. I thought a few of the characters were interesting. I do agree that maybe some weren't quite fully developed.
The reason I bring that up is because there's a lot of really excellently directed moments that make you feel for these characters, even though you know almost nothing about them. Like, I'm not going to say the name, but there's a character who dies, and he only uttered like maybe 3 lines in the movie, but I still felt bad that he died because of the way the other characters were reacting. But I'm like, I barely know this guy.
Right.
So I was like, I feel bad, but I don't really know him.
Well, it's funny you say that. That was actually my next point, that Michael Mann, who I normally find very hit or miss, I think was hit here. I think the cinematography and his directing was one of the bright spots of the movie. That being said, this isn't my kind of movie. The story wasn't doing it for me. And after we had a period piece with a romantic B story last week with Far and Away, I didn't really need to see another one. I just thought it was kind of boring, a little bit hard to follow. The romance wasn't happening for me. As we were watching it, I remembered a clip of the Ben Stiller show from about 20 years ago that we watched after the film, just like a parody sketch of 2 or 3 minutes long. And I think it says something that I found the parody clip of the movie about 25 times more enjoyable than the film itself. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to give Last of the Mohicans a C.
Really?
Yeah.
This is one of the rare occasions I will say that is wildly too harsh. Okay, so I honestly thought this was a movie with an identity crisis. It tries to be a drama about the Last of the Mohican tribe. It tries to be a war movie, and then it tries to make this awkward love story element into it that never really comes to
full fruition.
Full fruition is a very good choice of word, thank you.
There you go.
I know you mentioned it was very hard to follow. This is actually my second viewing of the film. I saw it originally in high school. At the time then, I also thought it was very hard, not only to follow, but also to get into, largely because of what I think is this identity crisis. That said, the direction by Michael Mann pays off in the smallest of ways. The director has a great attention to detail. The little things make big impacts. There's a scene about, I want to say, less than a third into the movie where they're just simply going over a bridge. And it's the most beautiful thing I've seen in a long time in cinema. It creates an optical illusion effect, and it works. I thought that was really cool. Daniel Day-Lewis, as always, gives a very good performance. But like I said, I think the mishmash narrative construction was a little off-putting. I know there was some issues with sound. I'm not entirely sure if that was just the overall way we were watching it or if the sound was down.
I think it was the medium we were watching it.
Yeah, we watched it over Netflix.
I know that Netflix has some audio issues, so you might not be able to hear the audio as clearly, because I don't remember the waterfall scene being that inaudible. Like, just for example.
And I recall that too when I saw it originally.
I'd say, Dan, take some of that into account for your viewing. That's all I'm saying.
But overall, I thought this was a good movie. I do confess it does have flaws.
It does.
It still holds up as a relatively good whatever it is.
Well, I wanted to ask you, this is just a weird question. It came up. Like, as I was watching the movie, one thing that frustrated me is that there are multiple cuts to this movie, and I believe I must own the director's cut, because there were certain scenes where lines of dialogue were cut in half. Like the speech at the end was about half as long as it should have been. So there were elements to that frustrated me. I guess that maybe it came to that identity crisis type thing. And there is one thing about that I think really strikes true to that, is that if you guys thought that the movie was hard to follow, try reading the novel sometime.
Oh, I can't imagine doing that.
Because
read it briefly as when I was younger, and yes, I agree.
Like, that's one of the things I think that's pretty awesome about it, is that it does quite a bit with a fairly dense and what some people have described as being virtually unreadable. Sorry, James Fenimore Cooper.
And I'll agree with you on that. Like I said, it's still a pretty good movie. I won't say it's my favorite old classic that we've run, but it's still worth a watch. The Last of the Mohicans gets a B-.
My grade isn't that far below that. You guys act like I gave it a D.
No, but I don't know if I'd say the film was average.
I certainly wouldn't.
It's not average. That's what I would...
I understand that you said it's not for you.
I know
and that's okay.
Yeah, I know the caveat out there that this is not my kind of movie, and it's the second one in 2 weeks that we've watched.
I think it's...
So I wasn't really into it.
I will admit that, but I do think it's very different from Far and Away, and I think that it certainly has some things that are better than Far and Away.
Well, the acting is certainly better than Far and Away. I will give you that.
Okay.
And as I gave Far and Away a B-, you guys are right. I will up my C to a C+ for Last of the Mohicans, because you're right. The acting, specifically from Daniel Day-Lewis and Michael Mann's directing, were better on both counts than Far and Away. I don't think the story, for me, was as good. It was certainly harder to follow than Far and Away. But two major aspects of a film are its lead actor and character and the directing.
Okay.
And I think this one definitely did nail both of those marks.
I will confess something. Even when watching the movie, the primary reason that I wanted to bring it is because my favorite part of the film is like the last 15 minutes. Like, it all kind of builds up. I will admit it has problems, but I feel like it culminates in some of the best stuff I've ever seen, just cinematically. Like that 5-minute action scene, or that 5-10 minutes, which was really intense for you, Dan. Yeah. I thought it was a pretty good way to cap it off.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'll give you this. If you believe that I would get more out of watching it from the DVD version without the possible audio issues, with certain lines and scenes left intact, I will give this movie another go.
Okay.
And Justin only gave it a B-, so I can't imagine I'm going to give it that much higher than my C+ already, but I will watch it a second time if you'd like me to.
Sure, I'll bring it to you sometime.
All right, well, we're going to wrap up with our Oscar-nominated film. We're going through the alphabet with the Oscar nominees dating all the way back to the original Academy Awards, and this one comes from 1943. It's called Action in the North Atlantic. It was nominated for Best Story that year. Humphrey Bogart and our old friend Abe Lincoln himself, Raymond Massey, star as friends in the Merchant Marines together during World War II, who become even closer when the oil tanker they're running gets sunk in the Atlantic by a German U-boat, and they're adrift for a week and a half. Back to sea it is on a new ship when the crew is attacked again. And basically, since this movie actually came out during World War II, it's little more than a propaganda film, which diminishes its credibility greatly. It also came out the year following Casablanca, so in my mind, it's a huge step down for Bogey. Raymond Massey, however, who we're fastly finding is one of our favorite old-time actors, is the real star of the show, actually. He's Captain Steve Jarvis here. His calming tone, which worked wonders for him in our very first Oscar nominee A to Z film, Abe Lincoln in Illinois, works his magic again here, and he truly steals the film, in my opinion. In addition, the special effects really stand out as being some of the best I've seen for such an early film. There are also 2 very cute kittens added for the awe factor, but these things aren't enough really to bring the film up to much of a positive. I'm not a fan of war pictures in general, and especially ones done with this kind of a tone. Similar to the surprise hit last year, Act of Valor, in theaters, this was intended to be a short documentary film about the Merchant Marines, but Warner's decided to change it to a feature as the war continued, which means they also added in a completely pointless half-story about the men's relationships with their women on shore. All in all, I'm sure it did its part at the time to rally the troops and probably get some people to enlist, but that doesn't stand out to me as the mark of a good movie. For me, it is a C-. Oh. Justin?
Here we go. You mentioned that it was a little more than the propaganda film. I think that's a fair assessment. I thought this had some very interesting cinematography, particularly during the action sequences, and some of the stuff while in the ship was well put together. The effects, Dan, you are absolutely right on the money with, especially with the 40s. Raymond Massey is slowly turning into one of my favorite old...
God, the guy's awesome.
He really is. He truly is. And the fact that he manages to outact Bogey in this movie speaks volumes of how much of a good actor this man is.
And you're not wrong about that. He stole every scene.
That said, while there is some interesting cinematography, the abundance of random cute animal shots do not do it any favors whatsoever. It becomes goofy propaganda, and I'm sorry, but propaganda is still propaganda, regardless of whether or not it may have good things going for it. Maybe this had some credibility in the 1940s, but it's not what film can be or should be. Action in the North Atlantic gets a C.
And I have to say, I mean, if they had stuck with the original thought of making it a documentary, a documentary is fine. That might have been a little better as a film. Obviously, a documentary would be. But yeah, this was just so heavy-handed. It was hard to really take seriously as a movie. Joe?
Well, I would say that I think that if it was a documentary, it could still have been very easily manipulative.
Sure. As
propaganda. But I do see it would have been, I think, a little more straightforward. But I think that, I don't know if I see the propaganda quite as strongly as you guys did. I felt that it definitely was there. Because it's a World War II film taking place during that time, it's obviously going to have some propaganda. But I felt that a lot of the conversations that the sailors had in the ships felt very real to me. And I thought it was interesting that they might have pushed some propaganda onto the audience, but they brought up legitimate points that some people might have against the war, which I thought was pretty bold for a propaganda movie to do. Admittedly, those characters were shot down, but still the fact that it was...
Immediately.
But the fact that it was even there, and I thought that it was portrayed fairly realistically, was better than it not being there at all, which I think some propaganda films could have easily done. Just saying, America's great, and that's all you need to know. So it's not the worst propaganda I think I've ever seen from that period. I will admit that Humphrey Bogart was a bit disappointing in this. I thought he was getting better towards the end of the movie, but in the beginning I could barely notice he was there, and that was really surprising. But as you guys said, Massey's really good. I really think he's an excellent actor. I'm surprised I'd never heard of him before, but he's slowly becoming one of my old favorite actors as well from the classic period. This movie has a very average story overall, but I liked some of that dialogue, and as we mentioned, the special effects were really, really good for the time. That really attracted me. Some of the cinematography was interesting as well, but overall I would say that it's a slightly above average movie for me, and I'm going to leave it with a C+.
Did you enjoy the kittens?
The kittens were kind of enjoyable, and I actually thought that seemed sort of a more modern thing to do. Just having random shots of kittens seemed like something from the YouTube generation. So it really stuck out to me as being something odd and unusual. You forgot the dog, too.
Oh, that's right. Yes, there was a dog in it.
And I will admit that pretty much the portions of the plot where they went on shore were completely useless. Like they were
the worst.
Once again, a romantic subplot, which I would dare say was even more useless than the one in Abraham Lincoln, Illinois.
I agree.
So I don't know what it is about 40s movies with that. You think with Casablanca there'd be more of a hindrance for that sort of thing.
Especially after Casablanca.
You think there'd be a higher standard for romance at the time, but...
Yeah, but you'd also think after Casablanca that Humphrey Bogart wouldn't necessarily just phone it in either.
Maybe
that's exactly what he did here.
Maybe he just said, you know what, I've made the movie of my career, I'm just going to do that.
However, just to play devil's advocate here, I believe I read somewhere that Bogart was also in the Navy for a brief period of time.
Yes, he was.
Now, wouldn't you say that he might just do that as a fair tribute to those that are serving in World War II?
Do what? Give a terrible performance?
Yeah. I didn't say terrible. I just said star in a World War II movie.
I'm not questioning why he starred in it. I'm just saying he gave a terrible performance.
I think what he's saying is that you could have paid respect to the troops by giving a good performance.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
Yeah, I'm just saying his performance was phoned in, and after Casablanca...
I appreciate the devil's advocate laws you're making, but let's face it, the best way to pay tribute would be, putting effort into it.
Or maybe there's a third possibility that we're not considering.
Right.
Bogey was such a gentleman that he allowed Raymond Massey
to take center stage,
which he clearly does in this movie.
That could be possible. Well, Massey is a good actor. Maybe he felt like he needed to give him time to shine.
Yeah, he really is. And I, too, am surprised we had not heard of him until Abe Lincoln in Illinois.
Such a shame,
because he's a really, really good actor.
And he's so funny.
He's very funny.
He's so dry.
He had some funny quips in this, just like he did in Abe Lincoln.
He was like the most likable character.
Yeah.
The only likable character.
Yeah, I stand corrected. The only one.
All right, so that wraps up another week. Unfortunately, we didn't have any real glowing reviews this week. Hopefully, over the next couple of weeks, that will change. There's some high-profile films coming out, including 12 Years a Slave. And Joe's YouTube channel is up and running, and that is Merlin Boss on YouTube. You can check out all the videos there. And we've got our Facebook, which is Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. And as well our Twitter, which you can follow us on, and that's at Film Fanatics Pod. Well, that is our show, and we'll see you back here next time. It's Film Fanatics. Thanks for listening. Bye!